Hi everyone. These are some highlights events that took place in May in history. The 1st of May 1169. Anglo-Normans land in Ireland for the first time. Dermot MacMurrough, King of Leinster, has not had a good press. According to the historian Gerald of Wales, he was a man who liked better to be feared by all than loved by any. One who would oppress his greater vassals, while he raised to high station men of lowly birth. A tyrant to his own subjects, he was hated by strangers. His hand was against every man, and every man's hand against him. Dermot was even accused of kidnapping the abbess of Kildare and killing more than 100 people who tried to stop this wanton and sacrilegious outrage. In 1166, an alliance of rival Irish kings rose against Dermot and kicked him out. But he was not a man to stay down for long. Having fled across the Irish Sea into exile, Dermot then begged for help from England's king, Henry II. "Henceforth, all the days of my life, on condition that you be my helper so that I do not lose everything," he promised, "you I shall acknowledge, as sire and lord." Ireland and Britain had always been part of the same world. The Vikings who ravaged England's shores had also founded Dublin, and there had long been trading contacts across the sea. But on the 1st of May 1169, Dermot's entreaties produced a fateful result. At Bannow Bay, in County Wexford, the Anglo-Norman adventurers Robert Fitz-Stephen and Maurice Prendergast landed with 40 knights, 60 men at arms and more than 300 archers. These were the men who were going to recover Dermot's throne, and in return, they wanted Irish lands of their own. They made quick progress, not least because many of the Irish were armed only with stones. Wexford fell within weeks, and by 1170 Dermot had recovered his throne. But the bigger story was the arrival of the English, the first chapter in a long and bloody saga. The 27th of May 1933. Walt Disney releases the short animated film Three Little Pigs to an ecstatic reaction, with many American cinemas running it for months to come. It becomes famous for its song, "Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf?" memorable, performed by fiddler and fifer pig. The 28th of May 1588. The Spanish sets sail. King Philip II's fleet leaves for England's shores where disaster awaits. In the spring of 1588, Lisbon was abuzz with activity. For months the King of Spain and Portugal, the mighty Philip II, had been planning an attack upon the Protestant heretic, Elizabeth of England. 2 years earlier he had sent instructions across his empire, ordering harbors on the Mediterranean to send ships and weapons to the Portuguese capital, from where his invasion fleet would sail. By the beginning of May, the preparations were almost complete. Philip's admiral, the Duke of Medina Sidonia, had collected an armada of 130 ships of every shape and size, low troop transports, carracks and caravels, galleys powered by sweating oarsmen, tall, courtly galleons. There were 6 fighting squadrons and 23 supply hulks, 8,000 sailors, 2,431 guns, 600,000 ibs of salt pork and 14,000 barrels of wine. Nothing would be left to chance. Not all the omens were good, however. The original plan had been to sail earlier in the spring, but the weather was unseasonably grim and stormy, and the expedition was constantly being postponed. This meant any element of surprise was lost, since Elizabeth knew perfectly well what was happening. And in Flanders, where Philip's men were already fighting rebels, 30,000 troops waited impatiently for their transports to arrive. At last, on the 28th of May, it was time to sail. Medina Sidonia hoisted the holy banner, blessed by Pope Sixtus V himself. The crowds along the quaysides cheered and waved, and the fleet eased out into the mouth of the river Tagus. But they were, of course, sailing straight to disaster. The 5th of May 553. At the behest of Emperor Justinian, the Second Council of Constantinople opens in the East Roman capital to try to reconcile rival views about the nature of Christ. Was he human, divine, or a mixture of both? However, theological unity remained elusive. The 29th of May 1943. Rosie the Riveter hits the headlines. At the beginning of 1943, a jaunty new song seized the imagination of the American people. From the traffic cops in the streets of Chicago to the shoeshine boys at New York's Grand Central Station, everybody was whistling it. And thousands of women working in factories across the United States knew every word of every line. After all, they were in it. The song was Rosie the Riveter by the Four Vagabonds. It tells the story of a girl called Rosie, working on the assembly line to build planes for the US Air Force. Her boyfriend, Charlie, is away with the Marines. But she is determined to do her bit. Wiping the grease from her sweating brow, she's making history, working for victory. Rosie the Riveter was the sensation of the season. Soon it was surging up the sales charts, and to mark the moment, the Saturday Evening Post asked the nation's most popular artist, Norman Rockwell, to design a special Rosie the Riveter cover. Not to be mistaken for the 1942 We Can Do It poster, also featuring a female riveter. Rockwell based his Rosie on a real person, a 19-year-old telephone operator, Mary Doyle. For inspiration, Rockwell turned to Michelangelo's painting of the prophet Isaiah on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. In place of the prophet, his picture shows Rosie munching a sandwich, her arms bulging with muscles. Her blue work shirt is covered with badges, an Army Production Award, a V for Victory badge, even a Red Cross blood donor's badge. Her foot rests scornfully on a copy of Mein Kampf. Behind her flies the American flag. Rockwell's cover became a symbol of a great national crusade, uniting millions of men and women against the tyrants of Germany and Japan. The only person who didn't like it was Mary Doyle, who was rather slimmer than Rockwell's Rosie. The 25th of May 1878. HMS Pinafore enthralls audiences. Gilbert and Sullivan's latest musical is a storming success on both sides of the pond. At the end of 1877, the composer Arthur Sullivan was on holiday in France when he had a letter from his chief collaborator, the writer W.S. Gilbert. The two men had just signed a deal to produce a new light opera for the impresario Richard D'Oyly Carte, and Gilbert had good news. He already had an outline of the new opera's plot, a love story on a Royal Navy ship, brimming with silliness. "I have very little doubt whatever but that you will be pleased with it," he assured Sullivan. "There is a good deal of fun in it which I haven't set down on paper." HMS Pinafore opened at London's Opera Comique on the 25th of May 1878 and was an immediate sensation, with reports of eager play-goers pushing and praying for seats or at least for standing room. The critic of the era wrote he had rarely been in the company of a more joyous audience, more confidently anticipating an evening's amusement than that which filled the Opera Comique in every corner. It was a hit, a palpable hit. In just 18 months, 150 unauthorized productions of HMS Pinafore were put on in the United States, while it played for night after night in London to enthusiastic houses. And it remains a cultural touchstone today. You can find its songs in everything from Star Trek and Raiders of the Lost Ark to Family Guy, The West Wing, and even The Simpsons. Please consider subscribing, and if you enjoy this video, please give us a like. It will motivate us to make more videos.